So before you went to law school, so you had your own business that was sort of like a marketing business. Is that what it was?
Yeah, so I actually started two different types of businesses. The first one was more for like event promotions, more for like the hospitality industry, but then I kind of tweaked that into a consulting basis in the professional sphere. So I had private clients, and then I also worked for the county. Like I mentioned, I started off at the county part-time, which I wanted. I turned away like a full-time job to do that because I wanted to develop that department. So I had, clients that were like doctors or local festivals that I would come in and we would strategize, what their goals were, what their outreach was.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. Today, we've got a guest that I'm really looking forward to speaking to, someone that I've been following on LinkedIn for some time, really been enjoying her posts and the things she has to say. So looking forward to diving into her journey and sort of her thoughts on building a law firm. So today we're talking to Alexis Johnson. She is a litigator. Maybe she does more than that, sort of outside Detroit area. So Alexis, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about your firm, what it is you do, and then we'll dive in.
Sure. So thank you for having me here today. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Alexis Johnson, the founder of AFJ Law Group, which is a litigation and transactional based full service firm based out of Detroit, Michigan, in Farmington Hills, actually. And we specialize in business and commercial real estate. So anywhere from corporate compliance to contracts, litigation, purchasing, leasing, commercial property, shareholder member disputes, things like that, we probably will handle. And I started my firm almost 4 years ago, as of the time of this podcast, after working in big law and business litigation department for several years.
So was that right after COVID started or right before?
It was literally in between. So I started the practice in November of 2020, and in Michigan, at least, we still had what was called a pause, which was not the same as the shutdown, but there were still a lot of limitations for going out in public or certain places that you could only go to in small groups. And so it was a little challenging because of, you don't have the same ability to go out and network or connect with people. But I also found it as an opportunity because I could do a lot of things remote and keep a really low overhead, which I took advantage of for the first about year and a half. I didn't have a physical office or anything. So pros and cons. And it did also get me a little bit more online. So like I started a YouTube channel and did a lot of social media marketing too.
The COVID thing, it's so hard. I mean, strange to think back on it, but, everybody was scared. I remember people that had firms. We had this, weekly Zoom call and everybody's like, what's going to happen? But I also remember people were coming to me saying, hey, we're going out to start our firm in the middle of it. And then some who had started right before and then it hit, and it's just mass confusion. One of the good things that came out of it was, like you said, sort of this virtual digital acceleration for everybody, which has really been pretty nice. I like it, at least. So let's talk about your firm. So is it just you, a kind of staff, attorneys? What do you have with you?
So I'm the only attorney. I do have relationships with other attorneys that I will partner with as a co-counsel sometimes. I have a really strong referral network. So, if I get a call from someone in an area that I don't handle, even within like business or real estate, because those are very broad fields and I like to specialize in what I do. So I have a good referral network for that way. I have a full-time admin, which is fairly recent within the last year. So up until then, it was pretty much me doing everything. I think some of that being, obviously people look at bringing people on as an expense instead of an investment. So reframing that mindset, but also releasing a little bit of control and embracing delegation on things that I don't necessarily need to do or are not my strong suit to do. So, the plan is to continue kind of growing and scaling, but right now it's just me and my admin and, attorneys that I'll bring on as co-counsel.
Yeah, it's that first hire is always sort of the most nerve wracking. But then,
Yeah.
most people you talk to, they're like, man, I should have done it sooner.
That's what everyone kept telling
Yeah.
me. I met with a couple other through LinkedIn, which is how you and I connected. I've talked to a lot of small firm attorneys, and they all were like, Alexis, how are you doing all this by yourself? Like, you're going to burn out, which is stuff that I tell my clients, but harder to tell me. And they're like, you're going to see the benefit once you bring someone on. And I am starting to see that a lot more now that, we kind of have a groove going.
And I'll say delegation, it's really hard just generally. It's a
Yeah.
skill. You got to learn it. I'm still learning it. There's some people that are experts at it. I hope to get there one day, but that's just, you'll get there. But let's go back. So I think you grew up, your mom was a lawyer, so you grew up with a
Yep.
lawyer in the house. So is this, was law something that was always on the table? Was this your destiny?
If it was up to my parents, yes. If it was up to me, no. So my mom is a family law attorney. She's been solo practitioner my entire life. She had me and my twin brother when she was a 3L. So right before taking the bar, she actually had to defer the bar exam because of our birthday. So sorry, mom. So I grew up, kind of seeing that strong role model with entrepreneurship and working in the law. And that was super admirable. But for me, I just didn't have a strong desire to go into law. And I don't know if some of that was just being rebellious because then my brother ended up going to law school. But I took a sort of different path. I worked in marketing and public relations. So I started my own consulting firm after graduating undergrad. And then I worked also for county government, developing a public relations arm for their animal control and pet adoption department. And then, I was started working on some of the animal cruelty investigations and prosecutions. And I realized how interested I was in, that. And it kind of made me start to realize that maybe I was just being a little defiant and I hadn't considered all the different types of areas of law. So I did go back to law school, walking away from all of that. So I was, at a different age than people right out of undergrad, which I do think helped having that background. But I made a commitment to myself and my mom that I was not going to work in family law and I did not want to work for her practice. And I was not going to use it as like a plan B because I didn't think that was fair to her either. So, I just kind of took every opportunity I could in law school, ended up at an insurance defense firm my second year, and I clerked there, got offered a position, stayed on, and I was like the only clerk in that office, but there were other offices. I think we had 10 offices at that time, but they threw me in basically. So I was doing depositions. I was covering 4 or 5 motions every, week for other attorneys. And I got a lot of experience that some of my colleagues weren't getting at the larger firms because this is more of a mid-sized firm. So after that, I was eventually kind of courted, I would say, by a recruiter for a larger firm. And I wanted to change practice areas at that point. Insurance defense was just not something that felt very strongly about. I didn't feel like I was actually litigating the cases. So I did take that opportunity and I learned a lot at the firm that I went to. But I think in the back of my mind, just growing up with my mom, being a solo, my dad was an entrepreneur in the construction space. So I think it was always kind of ingrained in me, and just having some of the businesses that I started prior to law school. It all kind of came full circle in 2020 when I was like, let's go for it,
All right, I want to unpack a lot of that. It's funny. My dad was a lawyer, and I was the same, sort of like you. I was like, I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'm going to do my own thing, But here I am. I ended up there. Never worked for him either.
Lawyer for other lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. So before you went to law school, so you had your own business that was sort of like a marketing business. Is that what it was?
Yeah, so I actually started two different types of businesses. The first one was more for like event promotions, more for like the hospitality industry, but then I kind of tweaked that into a consulting basis in the professional sphere. So I had private clients and then I also worked for the county. Like I mentioned, I started off at the county part-time, which I wanted. I turned away like a full-time job to do that because I wanted to develop that department. So I had, clients that were like doctors or local festivals that I would come in and we would strategize, what their goals were, what their outreach was. And at the time, social media was not super big, like it was like MySpace era.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to convince some of these clients, hey, you should pay me to like start creating all of these accounts and these posts, and it's a little outside of the box, but I think we're going to see some value. There were some challenges to it, but there were also some people that were really interested in it. And that was something that the county actually gave me a lot of leeway to do. And within a year, they offered me a full time position. So I ended up kind of transitioning away from my clients, from the consulting base into a position at the county up until law school, basically.
It's funny when you look back on your life, sometimes you can see the line of where you are
Yeah.
now. So, you had the entrepreneurial thing before you even started your firm, clearly. The other thing
Yeah,
is
for
you
sure.
learn how to market, you learn how to get clients, you learn how to sell, you learn how to convince them to, hire you, which is probably skills you still use today. What about the marketing skills that you sort of developed in, that non-law business? Is it stuff you use today?
I think so. A lot of people ask me about my marketing and my LinkedIn. I was actually at something last night and they were asking me like, "Oh, where did you like what coach did you do you work with or what training did you do for your LinkedIn content right now?" And I hate to say it, like it's kind of just something that I would say comes a little more naturally to me, but I think the big component is learning what the voice is for, if I was working with a client for their business or for themselves, what is the voice, what message do you want it to convey, and how can you do that in a way that differentiates you from everybody else in the same field. And so I do think that it helps me now because I tried to do some marketing when I was at the firms that I was at. Actually, during COVID, like everybody else, I was at this firm and I'm like, oh my God, like my clients are shut down. We don't have billable work. I don't know what to do. So I started doing YouTube videos, kind of dissecting the executive orders that our governor was releasing. But at the time, I didn't even realize that I was technically supposed to ask permission to do that. So luckily, my managing attorney was like, well, luckily the executive committee loves them, it's not a problem. But it occurred to me how I would have to go up all these channels to ask permission to do these things. And by the time I probably got it, it wouldn't really be relevant or I'd have a different thought about it. So I really embraced that when I started my own practice because I figure, not every person is going to want to hire me. I might not be the right fit for them. There's enough business in the world for that to exist. But the clients that I do want to work with me and hire me are clients that are going to resonate with my voice and being authentic in my practice. And that's something that is really important to me that I try to convey in all of my marketing and social media messaging.
Well, your LinkedIn stuff's really good. Well, I do want to get into that, and I talked to a lot of people about this. Lawyers are scared. They're scared to narrow their niche. They're scared to do this. They're just skittish of everything. They're scared to
Yeah,
be themselves. And
sure.
in marketing, as you know, a lot of it is attracting the right people, but also repelling the wrong people. And it's like you
Right.
said, there's plenty of work. Why not just work with sort of the people that you like and that like you? So, I think that's really important. And more law firms and lawyers should sort of embrace that instead of being scared of it. But yeah, so let's go back. So you were at the insurance defense firm, you got lots of good experience, you're doing litigation there. Then you go to a bigger firm. Did you start to do stuff other than litigation there? When did you get into the transactional work?
Yeah, so I was still doing predominantly litigation, but a little bit more transactional. And because I was in the business litigation department, I was working with obviously much larger businesses, but with a variety of issues. And we also had some product liability, cases, which involved quite a bit of transactional work as well. But to be honest with you, I didn't have a ton of transactional experience when I started my practice. It was something that I really felt strongly about developing, like in the real estate and construction sphere. I think some of that probably because of my dad. So when I started my practice during that pause in COVID, I utilized that time not having any clients to get my real estate salesperson's license, which people will ask me today, why don't you just get the broker's license? You're an attorney, you already qualify for it. But for me, it was more about learning both sides of the transaction from the sales agent side because I already understood the legal aspect. It was kind of like a little refresher of real property and contract law. So I took that course, passed the, exam, got my licensing, and then I started working with a lot of real estate broker and agents, like actually going to their offices, talking to the agents, understanding what types of issues come up in the transactions, assisting on some of those deals. And now I have very strong relationships with brokerages across Michigan where they'll call me if they have a client that something's come up in a transaction. So I kind of grew that experience just based on my desire to learn it. And I think that goes to say for any attorney, I get emails or calls from people that are like, how did you get into the construction industry? I want to do that. And a lot of it is just being willing to learn and also not having this inflated sense of self. Like, I'm an attorney, I can just get a broker's license. I don't need to understand, the more, I don't want to say elementary, but like more entry level area of whatever it is you're trying to learn. And like just being willing to learn from whatever level you're at, even if it's below the attorney level, because a lot of it is relationship based.
That's another thing you said that I really like. So, I sort of did the same thing. I decided I wanted to learn this stuff. And, when I started, I didn't know where it was going to end up. It sort of changed a little bit over the years, but I just dove in and did it. And I tell people all the time, I'm not one of those people that say follow your passion, but you definitely need to follow your interests because you're
Yeah.
going to be with it a long time. And if you're
Right.
not going to be interested in it deeply, then you're going to get bored or hate it or whatever. So I recommend that to everybody. Follow your interests. You're interested in real estate. You went down that path. And so you mentioned when you started your firm that you didn't have any clients. Is that correct? When you started there, you had no clients?
That is correct. I had no clients. I had a little bit of savings because I was, I had bills. So I was like, I can't just leave, So I kind of tried to plan a little bit in that way, but no, I had no clients and I didn't take on any loans and I didn't have any family support. I just decided I was going to go for it. And there was no option outside of succeeding.
That's awesome. So what was it that pushed you over? You got a, probably secure job. You're probably making good salary. Why take the risk? Why go out there with no clients to do your own thing?
So I think that it's a hard thing to say because I really benefited a lot from working at firms outside of graduation. Even growing up with an attorney, I think I have an advantage just because I was used to going to court. I had met judges. I felt more comfortable than probably people that had never gone to court before. But working in those practices gave me a lot of mentorship and experience that I think is invaluable to my practice now. But deep down, I always saw this vision of myself that I felt like I was chasing and I couldn't figure out how to do it. Like, I saw this concept in my head and I knew that it was there, but I didn't know how I was going to get there. And during COVID, especially at the firm that I was at, we would get calls from like the smaller businesses. And sometimes I would end up talking to them for, they got my number online somewhere and, I'm an associate. So I answer the phone. I'm not, partners are usually off doing a bunch of things or in trials or whatever. And I could just tell speaking with them that they knew they weren't going to be able to really afford the type of legal support that they needed at the firm, or they were just going to be like some other file, whereas this was like their life. This isn't just like another task on someone's to-do list. And that's not to say anything about the firm that I was at. Obviously they have different resources for much larger clients, but it really got to me. I thought about it a lot, and I don't feel like the big law environment was for me. I am not someone that is, I've never desired climbing the corporate ladder and just kind of existing at the top or whatever that is. I'm always about trying to challenge myself to make sure that I feel like I'm doing what, not necessarily what I enjoy, like you were saying, but where I feel like I have a purpose and where I feel like I'm being true to myself and my values. So it just kind of started to seem like an opportunity that I should try. And I had some idea of how I was going to generate revenue, which is something that I think a lot of attorneys do not talk about enough at the beginning. how do you make money? Because, everyone always likes to talk about the success, but I will be the first to tell people, I knew that there are two ways that you can make money starting off as a solo with no clients. One is doing doc review, and another is doing court appointed work. And so I decided to do court appointed work representing criminal defendants that were indigent. I signed up for every single possible court that I could in my county. And I had no experience really in criminal law outside of taking crim law. So I had no experience. And some of the courts required me to come in and shadow other attorneys before I could even get on the list. And I wasn't paid for that, but I did it, and I wanted to do it because I felt like for me doing court appointed work gave me, I was still in court, I was still getting to use my trial skills and hone them. And criminal law is very different than civil law. I mean, it sharpens some skills that you aren't used to using. And I worked with a lot of great attorneys that kind of took me on, but also had civil practice areas. And so they said, hey, if you're interested in real estate, if you get a case you want to take on, but you're unsure about something, call me. I'll walk you through it. I don't want any money for it. I want to help you. And so I was able to generate some income from doing that, but also some, intangible benefit by connecting with those attorneys who really kind of helped me out too. So I do think, and I don't want to get on my soapbox about it or anything, but I think it's important for people to understand, like if you're starting a practice with no clients, your phone's not going to ring. I think probably my phone did not ring for the first like 2 months with like a client calling about something that I did. And you have to understand and be okay with that uncertainty. But there are options that I think other attorneys don't like to talk about because it makes it sound like, oh, you didn't just start off and your first client wasn't a multi-million-dollar company. That's rare. That's the exception. It's great if it happens, but there are ways that you can continue honing your skills and, bring in a little bit of money to make sure that you're not too stressed out when the phone isn't ringing right away.
Yeah, I think everything you said there is so important. So, there are options. I love that you were hungry and you just went and grabbed them. You just went and did it. And like you said, you met all these people along the way that probably are a benefit to you in your practice now. I'm sure they send you stuff and you can lean on them, and maybe they can lean on you too. But yeah, so you went out, you had no clients. You're like, all right, I'm going to go do that kind of work to make sure I get some revenue in. And then you decided what kind of practice you wanted to do civilly, right? So you wanted to do litigation and maybe some of this transactional work. So what types of things did you start to do to develop that or develop the pipeline of clients?
The big thing I did was I started a YouTube channel. And the purpose for those videos was I wanted to have like short, like 4 to 5 minute videos where a business owner could watch it and walk away with some level of information and it not just be an advertisement for my firm. So I kind of wrote out a list of a bunch of topics, and it was basically just me like this, in front of the camera talking about something for a few minutes. Once I got a little better at editing videos, I added in like slides with text and all that, but I basically put a lot of focus on that. And then once, the pause was lifted, which was kind of like early 21, I started going to networking events. And most of the events that I would go to, I didn't know anyone. So I would just walk in and say, hey, I'm Alexis, I'm a lawyer, I'm representing business owners. I'd go to a lot of like networking events for business owners or in real estate. I kind of stay away from the lawyer ones at first, just because then if you're the only lawyer, a lot of times people want your card and want to talk to you. But yeah, I would just go to a lot of networking events. I basically would tell anyone I met, that I was an attorney and what type of practice I had. But I also would say, hey, call me no matter what if you need a different type of lawyer, because my mom and brother are family law attorneys. I have close relationships with criminal attorneys. I have, attorneys that work in personal injury, because the other part of my practice, my goal for my clients is to be a resource. So even if I can't handle their problem, I can put them in touch with someone that can and that I know will give them, value for what they need. So that's basically what I did. Just went out and shook a bunch of hands as much as I could.
I love it, man. That's what you got to do. It really is what you got to do. I tell people back in the day, I would just, I would go to these coffees, breakfast, lunch, whatever, with attorneys and accountants and whoever. Mm-hmm. And people, I remember early on, I was like, well, how am I going to meet these people? And it's just, every time I went to one, I asked them, is there anybody you can introduce me to? And then you just go down the chain. It just kept going and kept going. And I remember there were days where there were some of those lunches and whatnot that were just painful. It's just like, I need to get out of here. But I
Yeah,
just kept doing it. And all of that work way back then still, generates. And number one, I met a lot of cool people that I'm still friends with.
sure.
And they refer me work and I refer them work. So, lawyers need to get out from behind their desk and get out there in person. I
Yeah.
mean, Zoom's great, but you got to be in person, I think. What do you think?
And I think it's harder for the bigger firms because as an associate, you go to these events, but like you're not really networking or anything. Although it's interesting because as an associate, as soon as you become a partner, it's like, okay, so you're supposed to be generating business now. But there's like this disconnect. But I think from my marketing background, I'm very used to just kind of going to things. I always figure you have nothing to lose. Like my favorite story about this is I had applied for an internship at the Michigan Supreme Court my 2L year, which was about an hour and a half away from where I live in Lansing, to work for Justice Bridget Mary McCormick. And I didn't hear anything for like a month. So my law school sends, they have tickets to some gala and they said, oh, she's being honored there. And I was like, I want one of those tickets. So I went, I saw her, I went right up to her and I was like, hi, you don't know me, but I applied for your internship. I know that I live, a little far away, but I'd really love to be considered. It would be an honor to work with you and learn from you. And the commute is not a problem to me. And she was probably like, who is this? But the next day, her assistant emailed me and I had an interview and then I got the internship. And
Nice.
so I think just being willing to put yourself, and I don't say that to say every story like that is going to be a success story or whatever, but being willing to put yourself out there and also accept that maybe it doesn't turn out the way you want. Like maybe it wasn't supposed to, but you never know if you don't try. And I think if you're going to have your own practice or business, you got to be willing to put yourself out there and humble yourself a little bit and show that you're really interested. Especially now, everybody kind of, hides behind like the messaging or email, and those get lost in the flux. And I'm not saying show up at somebody's door or whatever, but you got to differentiate yourself and show your intent that you're really interested.
Yeah, I agree with that. Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So let's go back to your YouTube channel. So is that still up? And, I know some attorneys have used that to great success. Is it still sort of a thriving asset, I'll call it, for you that generates interest and leads? Do you still add videos to it?
So I kind of stopped adding videos once I got more busy. I just recently added a video, but before that, the last video is probably about 2 years ago. But I still get calls from people who are, they Googled something, they found my YouTube. And the only issue is a lot of times they'll call and they're outside of Michigan and they're like, I want to hire you. I can tell that, my issue. And I'm like, I can't help you. You're not in the state. So I would like to try to expand my out of state network a little bit more. I have a couple attorneys I know in different states, but that's the only thing. I do feel like it still generates some interest and I do have plans to kind of revive it. But, then that's the flip side. Once you start getting busy, it's harder to maintain all of that effort without help. And even with help, I'm very against having marketing that just seems like an advertisement. So I think in your field too, it's very relationship based. You can't have like a just a general boilerplate ad that's going to attract the types of clients because they're looking to build a relationship that when they're trusting you with their business, whether a legal practice or otherwise, they want to know the person behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah, you just hit on 2 big challenges that I personally have gone through and that I've seen others. You start to get, early on, you're not that busy, so you have all this time to do this stuff. Then all of a sudden,
And energy.
and energy. And then all of a sudden, you're so busy, you don't have time, but you got to keep doing it because you're going to slow down at some point. So how do you balance that? And then the second part is, especially with the LinkedIn and the social media, it's, I write all my stuff. It's all me.
Mm-hmm.
I have never outsourced that to anybody. And I'm not sure, there are definitely things you can delegate. I'm not sure that's one of them that you can effectively delegate, at least not in my opinion, because part of it is it's my personality, it's my thoughts, et cetera, and you cannot really replicate that. Somebody else maybe could get
Right.
but it's just not the same. So it's hard to do. So I'm with you.
I agree with you. Yeah. And I'm the same way. I write all my LinkedIn stuff. One thing I will say that I have embraced is repurposing some of my content and tweaking it. So, like, if I wrote a post a year and a half ago, taking it and maybe retweaking where I'm at now and then posting it again. I have done that in periods where it's slower, or I mean, where I'm busier, or where maybe I'm not feeling as, great. It's harder for me to be as creative, like, for whatever reason. I have done that, but I've never had somebody write content for me, and I don't really plan to, for the same reasons that you just said.
That's huge. I repurpose everything. And
Yeah.
I had this post on LinkedIn early in the year, maybe March or April, and it went viral for LinkedIn. It went viral. I mean, it got over 1 million impressions. It was huge. I mean, I thought the algorithm broke. It was the weirdest thing ever. And then all my engagement fell off a cliff, and I've just been I've heard that across the board, everybody's feeling that. And so the other day, like last week, I was like, man, screw it. I took that same post verbatim and just posted it again. And it did really well again. I was like, that's all, not as well as the first time, but
Yeah, that's all you need.
And so the
Yeah.
people that saw it the first time, maybe they remembered it, maybe not. So it's,
I always think about that too. Like, that was why I was hesitant to do it, because I'm like, what if someone sees it and they're like, oh, she's just copying her stuff? But it's also like, so, like, if, I mean, there are other people that didn't see it that may get value out of it. And your posts always pull me in because they're like, thinking of starting a law firm? Here are things you need to know. And I'm like, what do I need to know? Even though I started one, I'm like, what do I need to know? Of clicking the down, the Dropbox or whatever.
And the other cool thing about leveraging the content and all that, so I really want to write a book, and I've got the outline, but you're sort of like, do I want to sit down for 3 months and just really write it out and just do only that? Or do I say, wait a second, I can write this section. It can be a video, it can be a few posts, it can be all these things, and then it'll just be a section in the book. So you get multiplier effects for that
Right.
one piece of content or one prep of content. You can sort of use it everywhere.
People that resonate with your content. I get people that come up to me all the time and say, and I don't even know if they like my stuff or not. I don't always see, but last night somebody came up to me and said something about a post that I wrote. So when you're resonating with people like that, sometimes I think it's important to repurpose it in, maybe not just in another post, but like you said, in a book or in a video or something, because people perceive messages differently, and you don't want to waste that messaging just because you used it in one way another time.
And then I think I saw a post of yours or something that each social media platform has its own personality, its own sort of rules of the road, whatever. And so, what you might post on LinkedIn is not going to be the same thing you would post on Instagram or whatever. So, what other social media are you on, and how do you approach the different formats?
So I have a Instagram and a Facebook, but they just post the same thing. They like auto post to each other. And then I have the YouTube, which is slowly coming back to life. But my main form of social media is LinkedIn. It's what I hold closest to me because, like you, I write my own content, and I try to write content that I wish I had seen as a new attorney, as a law firm owner, as just a human being, as a business owner. But I don't find that messaging conveys the same way in like Facebook or Instagram. So when I do those posts, it's more, something specific to like a legal area, like, different types of commercial leases. Or if I'm at an event, I'll do a post like that just to kind of show that community engagement. I've seen some social media done really well on Instagram with like reels and videos. I used to have a TikTok that I posted a lot on, which was more for fun. It was like me versus OC, like kind of making fun of the legal field and myself. I've gotten away from that too. But, I think videos are probably the way to go if you're posting on like Instagram, TikTok, even Facebook, or that more general type of content. Whereas like the longer paragraph, like monologue sort of style just doesn't seem to translate the same, but it has different audience. Like on Instagram, I think it's going to be younger people, or they're just scrolling. They're not looking to read. Whereas LinkedIn, you get people that are really dialed in and really feel connected to the people that they're following. So that's just been my experience, but I feel like I'm still kind of figuring it out too.
Well, it's fun. I mean, and everybody out there, I highly encourage them to follow you on LinkedIn. I really like your content. There's a lot of mindset, I'll call it mindset type posts, and that kind of stuff resonates with me. Like, for example, I came across one the other day. It's a quote. I don't know if this is a quote that you wrote or that you found. It's, when writing the story of your life, don't let someone else hold the pen. And that just hit
Yeah.
me. So tell me about that. Why don't you expand on that one?
So, sure. So, a lot of times I keep in my notes app quotes that I'll hear, if I'm at a conference, even sometimes on a TV show or something that I read in a book or online. If it's someone where I can locate the author, I will put their name. If it's not, I just put it as a quote because I don't want to make it like it was just I originated it. So, that was just something that I saw actually in someone's Instagram post that I follow, but I couldn't find like an author for it. I'm sure there is probably, if we Google, there's probably 4 people that will say they said it. But what I like is it's a reminder that at any moment, you have control of your life and the circumstances that are happening to you, whether they're amazing, whether they're good or bad. And I learned that I read The Success Principles by Jack Canfield probably like 15 years ago now. And I remember the first chapter being like, you're responsible for everything that's happened to your life up until now. And I was like, no, how is that possible? There was XYZ that happened. And then I really started thinking about it. And I realized that everything that's happened is an outcome of decisions, choices, or reactions that I've had to experiences in my life. And so I think that quote is a good reminder that no matter where you're at right now, you hold the pen on what happens next. And sometimes that can be really hard to accept if you're in a not really good spot. And I get that, I've been there, but it also gives you some freedom and creativity to say, well, where can I go now? Where can I go next? What can I learn from this right now about decisions that I've made that put me here? Because that gives you control. If you feel like everything's happening to you, then you don't have any control. And that's a really helpless feeling. But if you recognize the control that you do ultimately have on your life, then it gives you a lot of power. And you can say, hey, today, this is changing. This is different. So that's kind of what I got out of that quote.
Yeah, I love that. I have a similar thought. I can blame the world and everything out there about all these things, and there's plenty of things that I could blame it on. But at the end of the day, it's about how, sort of the Stoic philosophy. It's sort of, I can interpret it one way or the
Yep.
other, and really it's like I can only control what I control. So I'm going to focus on that and see what happens, right?
Well, you said stoicism. I love books, Marcus Aurelius. Love the Ryan Holiday book that I find that is a
Yeah. So it's, as you look back, you've been doing this for 4 years. You started with no clients and, you've built a pretty good firm. You're busy, so busy you can't do all the marketing you used to do. As you sort of look back on it, what do you think sort of one or two things maybe you could point to say, all right, these have been important for me to get to where I am?
I would say being willing to reach out and connect and communicate with people, ask for help. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there in that way. And really, honestly, just perseverance because any small business owner, I'm sure there are some months where it's like really slow, and then some months where it's so jam in that you're like, oh my God, how am I going to do all this? I need an extra day in the week. That's how I feel right now. But, a couple weeks from now, it'll probably be, okay, we need more people coming in. So having that perseverance to get through those periods, being an entrepreneur, it's very glamorized, especially if you look on like Instagram. It's very like, oh, I woke up at 5 a.m. I did a meditation. I worked out for an hour and then I had 20 meetings. And then I went to this networking event and, I made $10,000 today doing it. And it's like, that's not the reality. Sometimes it's like you wake up and, you don't have something to do right away and you're feeling a little like, oh, how do I do this? But then you start thinking about things you can do or that you needed to do that you put aside when you were too busy. So having that perseverance mindset really, I think, is the big thing, but also recognizing if, it's not for you. I think there's like this big sense, there's a lot of stigma in the practice of law, some of which are like you're a failure. If you go out on your own, you end up going back to a firm. Some of it, if you leave a firm to start your own practice, it's like you couldn't hack it, you know. So having that perseverance and sense of self that you maintain the most over everything. The other thing I guess I would say is have your, and I know it's three things, but your boundaries. So for me, you know, I know I said I did court appointed work, but when it came to what I was trying to build my practice on, I very early on decided I was not going to just take all cases. Like I remember doing a conference and someone said something like, "Oh, are you going to do toaster law?" And I was like, "What is that?" They're like, "Anything that pops up." And I was like, "No, I'm not going to do toaster law." So I did turn down, you know, calls. Sometimes people would call me about things that, you know, were way outside of my practice area or I had no interest in trying to learn, and it would be like a potentially really big case or client. And I remember some of my friends being like, "Why are you turning this down? You don't have this huge roster. Like, why, you know?" But for me, it was important to hold myself out as a specialist and to really only take the types of cases that I wanted. And obviously, you know, refer people out if I'm able to, but, you know, not to compromise on those boundaries and rules for myself. So I think that's something that has helped me out a lot because now I am known as a specialist in these areas and I'm sought for that, but it took some time to get there. And it's still tempting. You know, I get calls about cases that sound super interesting, but I'm like, there's a huge learning curve. It's not really fair to the potential client. And it's not something that I even want to start integrating in my practice. So maintaining that and not just being so focused on making money right now, but building a successful foundation for the future. I think that's probably the biggest thing I would say.
That last point is so important. I know early on in a firm, you're paranoid that you need money and you're paranoid that you're not going to get enough work and so you have this temptation to take anything that comes in the door. And I get it. You know, you need cash flow, but it's very important to stay strong like you have been able to, because there's a lot of that. You said, you know, you'll spend all this time to ramp up to figure it out. So your effective sort of, I guess, hourly rate, if you will, is going to be much lower because you spent all this time that you can't charge the client. The
Right.
chances of you screwing something up and committing malpractice start to go way up.
Yep. Yeah.
And then the other thing is, you know, if you're jumping around to all these different things every time, you never really become the expert in any area because you're constantly learning something new. And then by the time you wrap around to that thing again, maybe you've forgotten it. So that's, I think, really important. I'm glad you've been able to do that. So that's awesome.
I think it just goes back to, and I see this a lot on LinkedIn. I'm sure you follow Jonathan Pollard,
Mm-hmm.
but he talks about the scarcity versus abundance mindset, which is a mindset thing. But I think if you're always thinking, well, what if this is the only call, you know, this month, or, you know, what if this is it? Then you're more likely to cling on. Whereas if you just kind of let go and you trust that you're going to always have more opportunity, you will. There's always going to be other work. There's always going to be other referrals. If you send a really big case to someone else and they do a great job, they get a great, you know, result, they're going to remember you when they get a call for someone that needs a business attorney or real estate attorney. So it kind of pays itself forward, but I think you can't think in that scarcity mindset. You know, you got to be focused on the fact that there's always more coming.
You know, it's funny. I was talking to somebody yesterday, a non-lawyer, and we were just talking about business. And you hear about, you know, the deal of a lifetime is on your desk. And if you've been around long enough, you see that happens like at least once every year or two. You see the deal of a
Yeah.
lifetime. So it's okay if you miss this one, right? You want to do the right one. And it's the Warren Buffett thing. He says, you know, wait for the fat pitch. You don't have to swing at everything. Wait for the one that's right down the middle and then swing.
Right. And sometimes the client may think their case is this amazing case, and it's really not, but you can be blinded by hearing certain facts or amounts, you know, dollar amounts at issue or whatever. And instead of thinking about, wait, is this something that I'm competent to actually handle or that I have the capability of learning about? Or, you know, like you said, to those malpractice concerns, you're thinking more about how much money it could help, you know, with the firm, which is a natural thought. But again, you know, for me, I look at how to solve the potential client's issue. And sometimes that means it's not me that's solving it, you know, and having that wherewithal.
Yeah. So looking back, you know, 4 years into your firm, is there anything that, you know, maybe you wish you had done sooner or maybe something you wish you maybe hadn't done at all?
I wish I had considered having more support help, like with answering the phones and things like that, because I think some of that is like a control thing for me. I don't like releasing that control. I want to be the person that's doing the intake and scheduling. But I do think that sometimes I might have missed certain calls because I was just too busy. And, you have the best intentions, but by the end of the day, a million other things pop up. And, by the time you do call them back, they may have found someone else or whatever. And I think that having that help with the support would have been bringing that on sooner. And I feel like I should have known this because everyone I talked to kept saying, you should hire someone. And I said that to my clients, you need to hire people, you need to delegate. And then I'm not practicing what I preach. So I do think that is probably important. And then maybe just continuing education. I mean, I talked a lot about how I developed a practice area, but I do think that it's important to maintain, like you said, the laws change a lot, staying up to date on various things. I do that a lot now, but I think at first I was just so focused on trying to get my name out there, get the phone ringing, and learn this new practice area I wanted to bring in, that I wasn't thinking as much about making sure that I'm up to date on things. And fortunately, it's not like I missed anything, but I do think that's something that probably a lot of solos and small firm attorneys in particular overlook, because it's like there's only so much time in a day. You're working on your cases and then thinking about doing a CLE. It's like, and in my state, they're not required. So it's not like we
Really?
have to do them.
Wow.
Yeah. For the real estate license, you do, but for your law license, you don't. So now I do a lot of it regularly, and it's just kind of comes up with various organizations that I'm involved in. But I do think that's probably something I could have thought about, just making sure my foundation at the beginning was sound. And I'm fortunate that I didn't have an issue, but I do think that's something that comes up a lot for people.
So every lawyer out there knows that practicing law can be very stressful. Growing and running a law,
You're kidding.
growing it,
No, it's
yeah, exactly. And then add on top of that, growing and starting and growing a firm, add on those layers of stress. So how do you manage that? Do you have any routines? Do you have any go-to activities or things that you do that sort of get you de-stressed or sort of get some of that off?
So I think I utilize exercise a lot. I used to be a marathon runner. Now I do cycling, classes, weights. I'll do that. I work out fairly regularly. But I think for me, the biggest thing is doing something that uses the complete opposite side of my like analytical brain. So I will try to have like creative days, and I'm not like artistic by any means, but I have the painting by numbers kit where the whole painting is numbered and you just have to line up the colors with it. I just got into like flower arranging. So doing something that requires me to not be thinking, because if I'm at the gym, I'm still thinking about a case. I'm on the Stairmaster, I'm still thinking, okay, I got to get an extension on XYZ. But if I'm doing something creative, I'm just focusing on the detail and making sure that it looks nice and the color organization. So I found that taking time out to have those creative outlets, like either doing the painting or flower arranging or, things like that, has been really helpful for me. And I also like going for walks when it's not cold. So for like, the summer and spring in Michigan. But even then, I still find myself thinking about cases, or a lot of times I'll write my LinkedIn post while I'm on a walk, which is great, but it's not exactly walking away from the stress of the workday. So for me, it's like doing something that shuts that part of my brain off almost by force has helped a lot.
That's interesting. I've never really thought about that. That's really insightful. I exercise every day. Some of my best ideas come when I'm walking or running. I don't really run anymore. But yeah, so I get you there. It's just your mind can get down that path. But, I still identify as a drummer, even though I don't really drum much anymore. I used to. But
Oh,
when I do get into the drums, every now and then I'll get into it. I'm focusing on that. And you're right. I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm just thinking about that. So yeah, I might have to get back into that.
yeah, make a few, I don't know, solos or something. Do you have a drum set like in your
I do,
house?
yeah, I do.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna have to get back on
Yeah,
that.
no excuse not
I
to.
know. Well, just gotta get the time. So you mentioned you
Yeah.
used to be a marathon runner. I think you've run what, 5 marathons?
Yes, yeah,
That's
and 3 of
impressive.
them were, like, in law school and, like, a week after I got sworn in.
Impressive. So you don't really do that anymore?
No, as you get older, you learn that running's not super great for you. My mom used to always be worried about my knees, and luckily I never had any real injury, but I kind of used running as, like, a stress reliever in law school, And running marathons, you have to train. So I'd be running anywhere from like 40, 50 miles a week. And I think I just eventually got burned out. So now, I like doing the long distance cycling. It's much easier on your joints and you can kind of zone out a little bit. But yeah, marathon running, the last one I did was in 2017, and I don't think that I will do anymore.
I really like the long distance running. I can't because of my back. It's the pounding hurts it, but
Yeah, it takes a lot out of you, all of that, even trail running, because then you have to worry about like not, tripping over something, or I mean,
twisting an ankle,
so
yeah.
there's challenges. Yeah.
But there was something about the willpower. I loved the challenge because you hit that point where you're like, I just want to quit. And you're like, no, just go a little longer than this. Just
Yep.
this play in your mind, and I really liked that. And then overcoming that desire to quit. So I do miss that. Maybe I'll try the cycling too. So let's shift again. So here's another mindset question for you. So we read about all these people that are so successful and, they've built these firms, they've built these companies, and, we want to do that too. And we're trying to do that. But, for me, I know, and probably everybody, self-doubt starts to creep in. And so I guess the first thing is, do you encounter that? And then sort of how do you address it?
Oh yeah, I think self-doubt and like imposter syndrome are my two downfalls, and I try to talk about that on LinkedIn just so people, see that it's not this like stigmatized uncommon occurrence. I think the main thing for me that helps is when I'm thinking, usually you feel that way when you're comparing yourself, right, to like another company, or maybe like my best friend has her own law firm, and sometimes we'll be talking and she'll be like, oh, we had a great month, we made x whatever, and I'm over here like, my month does not look like that. Sometimes it's like that. But remembering, no matter what, that every person, even in the most large successful business, I mean, I look at Apple. Steve Jobs started off in a garage, you know putting some stuff together. It wasn't just like he overnight became this multi-million, maybe billion-dollar company. And it's the same for any business. So everyone started from somewhere, and you can't compare yourself to where that person is at. Even like my best friend who started her practice long before me, we can't compare ourselves. It's different, industries, different business length, different operational, different adversity to risk, which is a big thing. If you're less risk adverse, maybe you're willing to take out loans and hire people, sooner, or, get, an office space or product development or whatever you need to do. So there's so many different competing factors with how someone else is doing compared to you. And I think if you can remember that when you're feeling down, it's easier for you to realize that you're feeling down because you're comparing yourself to something that's. And in terms of the imposter syndrome, I just keep faking it till I make it. I'm a big proponent of affirmations, and mindset. So I just will be like, well, of course this is going to happen for me. Of course I belong in this environment. Now I don't struggle with that as much, but going to things where you don't know anyone and you're walking in like, hi, you should hire me. That can be really hard for anybody. So it's like, of course I belong here. Of course, this client wanted to hire me. Why wouldn't they? Almost like, I don't want to say delusional because that's like a whole, the delulu, whatever. But I think it's just challenging those thoughts, but also being okay with them. I read in a book speaking about stoicism that with emotions, if you think of them as like waves, if you try to fight, if you're in waves, you're going to drown. You're going to tire yourself out. But if you just relax and acknowledge this is just a chemical reaction in your brain, it's going to pass, then you're more likely to get through it. And you're also going to be more analytical about it, like, okay, or logical, like, okay, this is just a feeling, it's going to pass. Versus, I shouldn't feel like this is wrong to feel like this. It's natural to have doubt, especially when you're taking a big risk like having a practice or a business. I mean, that's, but at the end of the day, and I always look at it like this, if I'm going to bet on anything, I'm betting on myself. I'm not betting on big law firm who could care. I might be the Mike Ross to them, if you're a suits person. But as soon as I leave, they're going to find 5 other associates that are willing to do what I'm doing and maybe more. So if I'm going to bet on anything, I'm betting on myself. And that doesn't mean I don't still struggle, or that sometimes those thoughts don't, win for the day, the hour, the week, whatever. But as long as you know you're going to get through them and get over it, I think that's what counts, is like that perseverance to do that.
Well, I think betting on yourself, anybody betting on yourself, is probably the best bet you can make. I mean, the
Yeah.
best return on investment I've ever made is investing in myself. I mean, every single time. And so I think that's huge.
I just wanted to add too, like, is reframing what a win is, because if it's just about making the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time possible, probably being at a big firm makes the most sense. But if the win is having more time for your family, your kids, yourself, having better health, having better relationships, having more autonomy over your life and your practice, maybe that's the win until the money part catches up. And maybe it never catches up to that, or maybe it surpasses it or whatever, but it's reframing what a win is to you. And when you're comparing to a lot of these bigger businesses, their win might be different. It might just be as many dollars as we can get in the door every day. Whereas somebody like me, my win might be providing really great tailored representation to promote small business ownership in Michigan, because I think that's more important than, the larger corporations, like promoting that disparity. So it's just reframing the win too.
Yes. Okay. So for you, what's the best part of being an entrepreneur, owning your own firm?
I think the best part and the worst part is the autonomy and the freedom to kind of make decisions, but sometimes it's hard decisions that you have to make. Like at first when I started off, I worked with a lot of newer business owners. I really liked that because, again, promoting entrepreneurship is one of my goals. But now, I only have so much capacity, and I'm, growing a practice. So, my clients tend to be, more established, elevated businesses, and I can't assist as many of the newer businesses because I just don't have the time or capacity to do so. So it's like a good thing and a bad thing to have the control and make those decisions. But I would say having the autonomy, and there are some days where I'll schedule where I don't have something in the morning so I can go for a 2-hour walk. I could never do that working at a firm. Even if I went for a walk before I started, it would be like, well, why aren't you checking your email first? Or if something came up. So having that flexibility, which, sometimes you can't have that, but having the ability to create that when you can is, I think, really important.
Yeah. Okay. So you're the captain of your own ship, which is great. So as you're sitting here today and you're looking out into the future, what vision do you see? Where do you want to take your firm and your life moving forward?
So I see myself growing a little bit more. I never wanted to be like a large firm, but I would like to expand some practice areas by eventually maybe, bringing on some other attorneys in like IP or tax, kind of complementary areas to what I practice. So, growing, and maybe another business attorney or two. So like maybe small to medium, but not like huge. Just being able to assist business owners on a more holistic level, like from soup to nuts kind of thing. And personally, I really would like to keep communicating my message to people in terms of being authentic in the legal practice or as a business owner, and embracing vulnerability, embracing, talking about the challenges that we all face, but everybody kind of sweeps under the rug or feels like they have to have some sense of bravado, and promoting, going out there and taking a risk on yourself if that's the right move for you.
So have you been invited to do speaking on these sorts of topics?
I have been on a couple panels. I'm in an organization called Crew Detroit, which is commercial real estate women. And I was on a panel, Mind Your Business. So it was women business owners talking about, their trials and tribulations. And I've done some panels for the state bar. So, it's something that I've done a little bit. I'm always happy to do more if someone wants me to share like my story, and hopefully can inspire, motivate other people.
Well, I think you should put together a talk. I think you've got a lot of good things to say. I think people would like to hear that. So you should put one together, at least frame out the topic and then go pitch it. I think it would be a good talk. So,
Well, that means a lot coming from you. So I appreciate that.
so you've been very kind to spend today with me. We're getting towards the end here. So, if people want to find you again, they should go find you on LinkedIn and follow you. I really like your stuff. Where else can they find you? What's the best way to find you?
So LinkedIn, and also I have, like I said, Facebook and Instagram, and that's just at AFJ Law Group. Or you can search my name, Alexis F. Johnson, usually pulls up anything with me because no one else's middle name starts with an F. So yeah, I mean, or go to my website, afjlawgroup.com.
We can imagine you can have so many things for that F, for the right situation.
People like guessing what it is, but they rarely are correct.
So we'll just leave that mystery there.
Yeah, you can send me your guess.
Well, awesome. Well, Alexis, I appreciate you coming on today, and I like what you've done, and I like just keep betting on yourself, right?
That's right. And thank you for having me here. It's been great to kind of have a dialogue with you a little bit more than just on LinkedIn.
All right, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.